It's Sunday, September 29th, 2024, and we are 36 days away from the election. Welcome to today's Make It Make Sense mini episode. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, we are talking about Hurricane Helene, the damage left behind, and the fact that Congress failed to fund FEMA in its last funding package. When Helene made landfall Thursday night, it did it with wind speeds of 140 miles an hour that blew down power lines and trees and blew homes and entire neighborhoods apart. In the first few hours, the storm had knocked out power to millions of people in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Virginia. And by Saturday night, Ohio was dealing with more than 250,000 power outages as the storm continued north towards the Canadian border. In Florida, hundreds of people are now homeless after Helene brought with it 20-foot storm surges that crashed into homes and neighborhoods. In Georgia, Governor Brian Kemp toured the damage from the air and said it looked like a bomb went off. It wasn't just along the coastline either. As Helene traveled north, it weakened to a tropical storm, but that still meant widespread flooding and landslides, and many of those who chose not to or couldn't evacuate were and are still cut off. In North Carolina, more than 400 roads were closed, and the city of Asheville, which is home to the University of North Carolina, was all but completely isolated as floodwaters washed away major roadways and cell towers, making people there unreachable. In Tennessee, dozens of people were saved from the roof of a hospital, while thousands of others in other states were also rescued, just like this woman in Florida. But power outages, flooding, and isolation because of those things is making rescue efforts difficult, and as a result, 64 people have died as of when I'm recording this. Now, the federal government and state governments did jump into action almost right away, with most of the affected states activating the National Guard, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis even helped supply assistance to North Carolina, despite having enough to deal with in his own state. And the Biden administration said it deployed 1,500 federal aid workers, including 940 urban search and rescue team members across 3 states, and 8,000 Coast Guard members deployed to the Gulf will continue to search from the air and the sea. FEMA has also set up relief stations in affected areas with a total of 2.7 million meals, 1.6 gallons of water, and tens of thousands of cots, tarps, and blankets, not to mention 70,000 gallons of diesel fuel and 40,000 gallons of gas. And all of that will go a long way, no doubt, in help saving lives, and in the days and weeks to come, there will be stories of heroism and survival and kindness. But while nothing could have stopped Helene from coming, it was a Category 4 hurricane, we could have been better prepared by funding FEMA, and that has fallen by the wayside for the last several years. Most recently, it was stripped from the continuing resolution to fund the government because Congress couldn't come to an agreement on how to keep the government open, and specifically, Republicans tried to tie keeping the government open to the SAVE Act. Now, if you're a regular listener, you've heard me talk about this before. It was the bill that would have required people to show citizenship to register to vote, even though that's already something that has to be done, and there isn't a problem with non-citizens voting en masse. If you want to know more about this, go back and listen to MIMS Mini 29. So as Congress fought over this, they ran out the clock and had to strip a bunch of things out of that plan to fund the government, which included, yes, the SAVE Act, but also apparently funding FEMA, even though it was originally supposed to be in there. And that caught a lot of lawmakers off guard. According to Energy and Environment News, which covers exactly those things, they're very good at it, FEMA funding was cut from what Congress calls a clean continuing resolution, which just meant that it was going to be something that nobody was going to object to. Now, who would object to disaster relief? I don't know, but apparently it got cut without consulting key stakeholders and leaders, including the head of the subcommittee that's in charge of funding FEMA. That representative is Mark Amoti from Nevada, and he said, "They didn't call me in and ask me for any advice. Can you believe that? And no, Mark, I can't." Now, the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, so the guy that runs the committee that runs the money in Congress, is veteran Republican Tom Cole from Oklahoma. Now, when he was asked about stripping FEMA funding, he said it was done in good faith, saying the sense was, let's keep it as clean as we can. I don't regret the decision. To me, disaster funding should not be a partisan issue ever, but sometimes it is. Now, the resolution does allow FEMA to give states and cities and towns to request funding to clean up now using borrowed money from whatever budget the agency is going to get when Congress does actually fund it. It also extends national flood insurance, but only at its current levels. But as the Bipartisan Budget Center said, FEMA has, quote, no money in the bank, essentially, to help people in supporting these long-term recovery and rebuilding efforts. And that's because for 2 years in a row at least now, FEMA has run out of money before the peak of hurricane season. And this year, they had to stop sending out relief money in August for recovery because the agency had already run out of money and is currently running a $6 billion deficit, mostly from lack of funding. And as extreme weather events continue to rise, this year alone, there have been 19 declared climate disasters that have cost more than $1 billion in damage. And we're just getting into the last 3 months of the year. Estimates right now for Helene alone are between $95 and $110 billion. That's how big this was, and FEMA is $6 billion in the hole right now. Now, I know that funding FEMA in the days before or the day a hurricane hit would not have done anything to help people recover from Helene. That's just not how the government works. But putting in the money to be able to respond to natural disasters that we know will come and will spread devastation across multiple states seems like the very least we want the federal government to be able to do. Now, when Congress comes back into session after the election, they will inevitably have another down-to-the-wire, nail-biter budget fight again. And they have promised this time to make funding FEMA a priority. But funding FEMA has been a battle for a long time, particularly from people whose states are most affected by these natural disasters. People like Republican from Florida, Matt Gaetz, or Republican from Oregon, Cliff Bentz, whose state is currently being torn apart by wildfires. Members of Congress like that have voted time and time again not to fund FEMA. And it's not just those members. Members of Congress from all over have found it totally acceptable to use FEMA as a political football while people's lives are destroyed and they can't rebuild. Now, if listening to this whole thing has made you as mad as it made me researching it and then telling it to you, the good news is that there are a lot of local groups working to provide aid to the people affected by Helene, and I've got links to those groups in the show description if you want to help out relief efforts. Also, I urge you to call your representatives and your senators to let them know that you don't want FEMA to fall by the wayside again when they get back to Washington. Okay, that is it for today's MIMS Mini. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got bonus content there. And as always, please continue to share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod. All one word on every platform. Tag me in those things too. I'm at Grant Herms on X and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.